public health. A new report posting on Axios this morning reveals President Trump's MAGA media army is much bigger, broader, and more influential than most people realize. Joining us now, co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei, with more.
So, Jim, let's walk through this.
Yeah.
A lot of people that aren't familiar with this MAGA media universe might say, conservatives and people who support Donald Trump go to Fox News. Actually, it's much, much bigger than that. Walk us through it.
Yeah, I've been struck in the last couple of months, or even when I'm talking to CEOs or people in media, how little they understand the depth and breadth of kind of the MAGA media ecosystem. It is big, it is powerful, it is organized, and it operates so much differently than your traditional media ecosystem, and that they see this as information warfare. And we might think about it as like one or two names like Don Jr. Or Charlie Kirk, but it's a massive, massive ecosystem. You see a lot of it on X, so anyone who goes to X, formerly Twitter, you see a lot of these people. But beneath it is where all the activity is. If you go to YouTube, if you listen to podcasts, if you go to Rumble, if you go to Instagram, if you go on TikTok, if you go to any place where most people in America congregate for their information and news, and I think the two end up blending together, mega stars have way more clout, way more authority than most of the household names that your viewers are used to following. And they cut across all of these platforms. So they'll have huge followings for their podcasts. You look at podcasts on any given week, and that's how a lot of people get the vast majority of their news. You look at that top 10 ranking, you'd be hard-pressed to find one liberal, and you're often going to find 5 or 6 people from the MAGA media infrastructure in there and on that list. And then that content moves to YouTube, moves across TikTok, moves across Instagram, and they have a very shared common worldview. So even if you're thinking about your program today, where the interpretation that you guys have talked about of the Zelensky meeting, it's a different universe if you go into MAGA. They think that Vance was a hero and a tough guy, and they think that Trump was a master of the universe, and that Zelensky was disrespectful in both his tone and his wardrobe. And they're all in, and that's kind of the ecosystem that sits and is kind of the surround sound for Trump.
But it's not a homogenous ecosystem, as you point out. There are sort of 3 different subsets, and we certainly saw that on Thursday of last week, where you actually had this MAGA ecosystem split. You had a lot of people very angry about Andrew Tate and his brother coming back to the United States. You had a lot of people in the MAGA universe very upset about the Epstein files, and there seemed to be a split between these 3 different groups that you point out. Take us through those 3 groups.
Yeah, I mean, the big one is like the true MAGA meat eaters, like they're full MAGA, whether it's like a Steve Bannon or a Charlie Cook or Charlie Kirk or a Don Jr. Like they are unified on almost all of these topics. There is kind of a middle of MAGA, which is like mostly MAGA folks that you see, like someone like Hugh Hewitt, who used to be pretty conventionally conservative, who now would kind of fall into that category. And then the big one is like MAGA adjacent, and that would be like the Joe Rogans of the world, where they're not inherently political, not always political, but have become very MAGA over the last 18 months. And I think one of the reasons Trump won the election and surprised people was this merger of MAGA media with what I would consider kind of the bro longevity industrial complex, that kind of that Rogan universe, or even Huberman, who's a pretty famous longevity guy who increasingly is you find himself injecting himself into politics on X. And it's the 3 of those in totality that do have a lot of clout. And yes, they have edge cases like the Tate brothers coming back to the U.S. where there's some disagreement, but for the most part, they don't allow that much disagreement. And they use information, and I think this is the thing that Democrats are wrestling with right now. They don't look at it as news. They don't look at it as information. They look at it as information warfare. And they look at it having each other's back and being on each other's shows and going after anybody who's a critic. It's one of the big explanations of why you got Senate confirmation for every single person Trump wanted, because you do not want to be in the vortex of the mega industrial complex if you're on the wrong side of it, because they will come after you, and their people are listening and watching and reading them.
Well, it's also about towing the line. I mean, as you said, if you deviate, it's so funny. People are saying we're going to be open-minded. We're not being closed-minded like old media, like dominant media. And then they start their own media empires, and then they're afraid to do anything that varies at all from what the MAGA company line is, because they get just absolutely eviscerated from the viewers and their listeners and readers. So, Anand, we've talked about this before. I mean, you know, there used to be a presence for liberals. They did fairly well online, but they don't. They're as Jim said. You look at the top podcasts. You look at the top. You know what accounts are getting the most hits. It's usually it's these MAGA accounts.
Yeah, I mean, what Jim's describing, you know, in terms of an industry, is also in many ways the media apparatus of a cult, and functioning as media that broadcasts lies, convinces people to hate, is built on a brainwashing function, so that when the humiliation and the disgrace of Friday, as we were talking about, happens, there is ready for them a bunch of millions of people who will see it in a reality distortion field that has been created. And I think it's incredibly important. You're right that people who are on the pro-democracy side in this country build up a media apparatus that can, the word I've used again and again is help people make meaning. Right? Meaning doesn't make itself. When an event like Friday happens in the Oval Office, the meaning of that is not self-generating. And if you have this giant apparatus that Jim's describing that is helping people make one meaning of it, a meaning that is favorable to Vladimir Putin, favorable to the Kremlin, and you don't really have, you know, Democratic politicians certainly, but also not a giant new media apparatus on the pro-democracy side that helps people make a different meaning, that helps people remind people of what the United States has been, what it has stood up for in Eastern Europe, et cetera. Then you're just ceding the territory. And this is I just don't believe we can cede this new media territory.
Frank, let's get your thoughts on this, because I agree. It's not just about two silos, two teams talking past each other who can't agree on the same set of facts. It's about deliberate information warfare.
Right. And as I'm listening to this whole conversation, I keep asking myself the question, how do we as a nation ever get back from the trajectory where this is headed us, when there's no ability to pierce these systems, when it's not just Fox News we're talking about anymore, we're talking about an army, and where there is no ability for any sort of countervailing set of facts or authority or narrative to pierce through this, and the way in which it's so immersed. I'm just struck by the phrase the bro longevity industrial complex, because I think it reflects the way in which a lot of this MAGA world is nestled within lifestyle messaging and health and wellness messaging, and it becomes harder and harder to pierce that, because it is so niche, and it is seemingly apolitical in the same sort of way that Rogan was somebody who began as kind of an apolitical sort of guy. And so I just wonder, how do we ever escape this cycle?
Real quick, Anand.
You know, it's a very important question, and I think that in my last book, The Persuaders, the biggest thing I learned trying to think about this question is rebutting this bad information does not work. People don't like to be fact-checked.
Right.
Helping to explain the manipulation, helping to explain the con, that is the only thing that has ever worked against
The
it.
special report will be available this morning for Axios AM executive briefing members. Co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And The Atlantic's Frank Ford, thank you as well. And coming up, Republicans continue to face criticism from constituents over the Department of Government efficiency